Thank you everybody for joining us today. We're pleased to have Carolyn Melbye for a member of Elliott in Concord, and she is here today to discuss a presentation and discussion on loneliness and isolation. We're so glad to have her here today. We're glad that we have people participating in this topic. I just want to point out that this funding is from a China 15 grant through from Leahy Hospital and Medical Center and Winchester Hospital through Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Determination of Need process. So I'm going to send it over to Carolyn now, and she can tell you a little bit about herself before we get going. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you to the Acton Council on Aging for having me today to present on this topic of social isolation and loneliness, a more timely topic than I think we anticipated when the grant was first written. As Cheryl mentioned, my name is Carolyn Melbye, and I'm a therapist at the Elliott Center. I'm trained as an expressive arts therapist and have worked with seniors for about 9 years. And every year, I'm increasing my chances of becoming a senior. I'm particularly passionate about work with seniors because I think there's so much that older adults have to give to the younger generations, and so much that younger generations can do to give back to those who have served us for so many times. I'm going to start by sharing my screen with a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll walk you through the presentation that way. And I'd like to first ask if you can grab a pen and paper, or maybe an iPad or something you want to write on, or some people say they take mental notes, and to just ask yourself these opening questions. I think it's good that we make sure we address the concerns of this topic today. Let me just do my slideshow here, and we should be able to do a full screen. There we go. If you can't see the questions, you can hide the view. You can do thumbnail view on this side so that you can fully see the questions. The first one, I understand what loneliness and social isolation are and how they affect my health. So I'm just curious what your own thoughts are, 1 to 5, if you rate, with 1 being no knowledge or experience and 5 being the most knowledge or experience. And the second question, I know who I can reach out to and how if I feel lonely or isolated. And again, 1 to 5. And we'll return to these at the end of the presentation. First, I think it's so helpful to just define what loneliness and social isolation are, because someone can feel lonely and actually have a very big social circle, or they can feel not lonely at all and have a very tiny social circle. Loneliness is actually a subjective feeling of being socially isolated, or a noticed difference between the actual and desired quality or frequency of relationships. I like to think of when we see a picture of like a polar bear, we don't think anything of the polar bear being out in the middle of the Arctic alone. But if you saw a person out there, you think, oh no, they're probably lonely. So a lot of this is subjective, and a lot of it has to do with the human species just being a social species. We just benefit from being around one another and get a lot from contributing to one another's lives. Social isolation is actually the objective quantified shortfall in an individual's relationships that's often measured in terms of your social network size, your diversity of social connections, and the frequency of social contacts. So these have a big interplay in the research that's been done on loneliness, and in particular with the elder population, as well as loneliness across the populations. One of the books that I read for this presentation is a new book. It's the book Together by Vivek K. Murthy. And in it, he mentions they realize social connection stands out as a largely unrecognized issue. Many people thought that when he was Surgeon General, he would focus on things like opioid abuse and underage drug use, which he did. But he discovered that actually the lack of connection is what can contribute to greater health problems, maybe even more than we originally thought. So why does loneliness matter? This is a great question because you may say, I don't really ever feel lonely. Or maybe I do, but I just don't think it matters that much myself. Well, let's go back to Abraham Maslow, who created this hierarchy of needs back in the 1940s. And he said the pyramid reads from the bottom up. So basically, we have our basic needs, and then our psychological needs, and then our self-fulfillment needs. And some researchers are saying that right now, with the pandemic, we're all almost at the bottom of just needing our food, our water, warmth and rest, and safety. And you can't fulfill those needs. You can't fulfill the upper needs unless you fulfill those basic needs. So researchers, social scientists are concerned that people are not meeting those needs, then they can't even meet the needs of feeling socially connected. And that makes us more concerned about having loneliness. In addition, loneliness matters, as you see, because you see the next level above the physiological and safety needs is actually belongingness and love, that there is an actual human need for social connection. And there is eventually a human need for one's self-esteem or self-actualization at the end, achieving your own potential. You can't achieve your potential or fulfill your life if you have social connections. That's another reason why loneliness really matters and is important, that we figure out how to stay socially connected, particularly during this time of the pandemic when we're asked to stay physically apart. You may have seen some research studies, as this has been in the making for at least 10 years, actually. Some of the research studies I saw came out even like 2008 or so even before then, linking loneliness and health quality. I'm curious if anyone can think of a way that loneliness or social isolation has affected you or a loved one. Can you think about someone who was more isolated, who you noticed developed more cognitive decline, or someone who was lonely, who developed like mental health needs like depression? So chances are you've experienced someone in your life having one of these health effects. And you may wonder, is it the loneliness and isolation first, or is it the health? Like sort of which one comes first, chicken or the egg? Well, research studies across the board say that loneliness does affect our physical and mental health. This first study in the bullet point, it says low participation was linked to earlier death. This was an interesting cross-sectional study in Canada that went across actually 10 years. They had a group of participants who they surveyed, and then over 10 years, they saw these participants, if they passed away, and they checked to see if there was a correlational data to whether they had large social networks or weaker social networks. And in this particular one, they identified people who were high participants, like they had some kind of daily community and family connections, or low participants, people who had maybe monthly community book club, but not much more than that. And they found that low participation was linked to earlier death. It's also been shown that weaker social relationships are linked to earlier death. And this was a study done by the researcher, Dr. Julianne Hold-Lundstad in the US. And she did a long cross-sectional study over a few years as well, and found actually that those with strong social relationships are 50% less likely to die prematurely than those with weak social relationships. So a pretty strong connection between strong social connections and good health. You may have seen some of the articles like in the Globe or the Scientist, or perhaps in the other online forums that show that there are health effects, including heart health, diabetes, obesity, and cognitive decline that are linked with social isolation and loneliness. And again, some of these studies make a clear impact that the loneliness is affecting the health, and some it's not clear. If there's like a situation, for example, where say an older adult has a workout buddy going to the gym every other day, and then that workout buddy cannot go anymore. So then the person stops going. So is the loneliness sort of creating, the lack of exercise, Or, is the lack of exercise eventually leading this person to socially isolate in some way? So there is some concern about the connection there as to what begets what. Studies show that isolated seniors require more long-term care, which is certainly a concern. And isolated seniors are also more susceptible to elder abuse. For example, if they have a scam, they may not run it by like a family member or a friend. They don't have someone to reach out to validate a phone call or a request for money. So it could be a great concern that they also don't know who to reach out to regarding any abuse and reporting of it. So it all is rather depressing. And I'm sure that's not what you were hoping on a beautiful, sunny Monday morning. So I wanted to make sure that one of the things we covered were just different ideas for how do we deal with this? How do we, first off, I think, identify what loneliness is to each of us on an individual level and what social connections that each individual really needs and wants. My first step is to identify what social supports that you already have. And I don't know if anyone's heard of a sociogram, but a sociogram is a way basically that you diagram out who you know in your life, your social connections. And in a more advanced sociogram, you would say like you have a good relationship with so-and-so or you don't have a good relationship with so-and-so. But in this basic one, we're simply going to identify connections that you have on the different relational levels. So if you want to take out paper and a pen or pencil or your iPad, you're welcome to draw this out the way I'll show you on the screen. Or if you're not too much into drawing, you can write and notate as you like. We're first going to start with the self. So I usually like to put myself kind of in the middle here. Let's see. Let me just check this. You can do a better circle than that. I think it was Leonardo da Vinci who drew a perfect circle, and I'm an artist, but I don't always draw a perfect circle. So there you go. I won't require you to either. I'm going to put myself, you see, in the middle here. And then we're going to draw the next circle. I'm going to put your partner or a companion or someone who you're very close with or intimate with. Then we'll do the next circle, and this might take a little bit more time. Actually, we're going to do our family. We're going to do yellow for our family and friends. You might want to make this a little bit bigger. So you can basically, my suggestion is to write the names down of these people in your life who you feel connected with or who you want to connect more with. So it would be like family and friends, those who are close to you after a partner or spouse. And then we're going to add the communities that you're in. Let me give you another moment for family and friends. And we're just thinking about these contacts, not necessarily how you would connect with them yet during this time, but just who are these people in your life? You can see this looks a little different than a family tree because we're starting with you and we're expanding out, almost as if you're the planet. We're expanding out into your different circles or your different orbits where people are around you. And then we're going to do a bigger circle. And in this space, we're going to write in the communities you're involved in. For example, part of the Council on Aging and Acton. Maybe you're part of a neighborhood group or a spiritual group. Perhaps you're in a book club or an art class. Or perhaps you go to exercise classes, any kind of community event that place or people you're involved with. So I'll give you another minute here to think about different communities that you're a part of. And while you're thinking about this, you might think about where are the communities who you want to be more involved with, and you could write those on the side as some thoughts for later. All right, we'll move on to how we're going to use this sociogram. So I'm going to clear this here, my little orbits, and we'll move on to the next slide. Okay. Actually, we're going to stay on with our slide here and just think about these contexts in your life that you have here on the diagram, and think about how you can stay connected during this time. Our next step is, of course, we cannot see people in person. So how do we either see them from a distance? Do we visit them outside while it's still nice out? Do we take time to see them on using technology like Zoom, FaceTime, or even a phone call? And you might want to write down by each person like how you generally connect with them or would like to connect with them. That might help you to think about how to stay connected, as it's so important to think about that. And it also might be good to think about how often you might want to stay connected with these people. As I've mentioned before, some people can feel lonely with having great extended family and friends and several communities they're involved with, or someone could feel lonely, with just a few friends. So it really depends on what your needs are as an individual. I'm going to take this list and use it to further our coping strategies for dealing with loneliness and social isolation. Recommendations from the book Together, as I mentioned. The author is our former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, who recommends to make time to give your full attention to loved ones every day. And of course, this we can't do as much as we might want to now if we're not close to our loved ones, or if you have family and friends who are further away, or if they had to move away because of the pandemic, or maybe they just moved recently. It's important to figure out how to spend time with them. Is it a phone call? Is it a drive-by visit? Is it something that you can do safely just to connect with these people who are on your sociogram? This next recommendation is to genuinely listen and connect during this time. And I think this is meant more for those teenagers out there than the older adults, because I think that teenagers are likely to sit on their phone in the presence of parents or grandparents, much more likely than the older adults in our midst, who are probably going to genuinely connect as we've done for generations. His third recommendation is to learn to embrace and enjoy solitude. This was an interesting tidbit I got from his book, which is that many of us may have more forced solitude than we want right now, which might become and develop into loneliness. And how do you identify times that you want solitude for yourself? What you want within that solitude can be empowering. It can really be empowering to find out what your needs are for your own personal space and what you can do for yourself. His next strategy, and we'll talk more about this as well, is to receive help from others and offer to assist others, as it reminds us of our value and purpose in life. And Dr. Murthy's take on this is that it's more connected to our life values. But I'll talk a little bit later on how helping others and receiving help from others can actually be connected with the reduction in loneliness, simply from an aspect of volunteering and giving back. Again, staying connected is so important, in particular during this time, but in particular to reach out to others however you can. I know some people who actually have created like a quarantine list where they have on their daily list to reach out to at least 2 other people. This could work in different ways if you have the technology, of course, to reach out, or you have identified different ways you can reach out to people. Another strategy in dealing with loneliness, in particular, if it has become that a person is feeling a little bit more depressed from loneliness, is to write a gratitude list, as feeling grateful has been linked to reducing symptoms of depression and feeling badly about oneself. This refocuses your mind on what's positive. For example, the gratitude list might be that you enjoyed a phone call with someone today, or you got out for a short walk, or you got to take a pet for a walk, or spend time with someone you haven't connected with in a while. And these different things can help refocus your mind on the positive things that are happening instead of on what might feel negative. As I mentioned, volunteering is so important. And I know some of my clients have said that they want to volunteer during this time, and there just aren't as many opportunities. So it just takes a little bit more effort, but it's definitely worth it. Research study in 2017 found out that those who were widowed, if they volunteered at least 2 hours a week, then their sense of loneliness was almost erased. It was basically the equivalent of someone who was in a married or partner relationship. So it was an interesting study that even just 2 hours a week of volunteering can help to really reduce the feeling of loneliness and social isolation. And my recommendation is to volunteer in an area that you have skills or something you've enjoyed before, right? I think that just saying volunteering doesn't help if it's not something you enjoy doing. It's so important to think about for yourself, what would you enjoy during this time? And there are places that still have volunteer opportunities. Many of them might be online, or they might be like making phone calls to people, or they might be doing remote work for an organization. So they may not feel as connected as, for example, one of the things I enjoyed doing in the past is leading tours in a museum. That's not happening anymore, but there are other ways to give back to the museum and volunteer, though they may not be the same as they were before the pandemic. I'm not a doctor, but I definitely can say as a therapist that staying physically healthy and emotionally healthy is so important to reducing any concerns of anxiety, any depression, any like feeling irritable, any of these other symptoms of loneliness. Physical health has definitely been linked in numerous studies to staying mentally healthy and emotionally healthy as well. And I can't underestimate the power of humor. The power of humor, I think this is what is part of that social connection piece. I'm not sure if anyone has tried to watch a funny skit and now during quarantine time. I watched an improv group one time on Zoom, and it just was not the same as in person. And it was like, oh no, what a disappointment. But I think that it's so important to find other sources of humor, and perhaps that is through our staying connected with one another. And staying connected is so important in terms of just feeling good and finding those small, spontaneous joys with one another. So I want to see what people have in terms of questions and thoughts. If people want to do some discussion about the sociogram, if there are any questions there, I think we could probably start with that. And I will stop my screen share for the moment so that we can get questions in the chat or questions from the group. Anything I can answer in particular?
So just so you know, there is a raise your hand feature. If you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand and I can call on you.
Great, thank you, Cheryl.
I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, wait a minute.
Okay.
Oh, we have one. Hold on. Go ahead, Ruth. You can ask your question.
Okay. I'm recently widowed, and so I'm having trouble with the partner.
Mm-hmm.
Level of that. Also with a lot of the connections.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Ruth, thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm sorry for your loss. I know it must be challenging, especially during this time, but it's never easy when you lose your life partner. And yes, it is tough to stay connected because people may not reach out if they're not sure how to reach out, right? Sometimes people don't quite know how to reach out to someone who's grieving, and that can be very difficult. But the suggestion of volunteering or finding some way to give back, perhaps either you could, even if you're interested, I know some people have done like a fundraiser in honor of their loved one, sort of spread awareness of whatever the person passed by. It could also spread awareness of what you're going through and connect with others who are going through that likewise. There's another feature, I think I missed about the technology, but there are some, there's a very small but limited, but some research showing that like chat rooms are helpful, like specific if they're like talking about grief or talking about a specific support, that some people find those to be helpful and connective.
Okay.
Yes. And wonder if the Council on Aging would have supports in terms of if there might be a virtual, grief group at this time to provide support.
I do have some of those things now.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm so glad you attended today and shared your story with us. It's so important. Thank you.
So I do have another question from Bonnie. Go ahead, Bonnie.
The Council on Aging does have a group for people who were recently widowed, or even if they've been widowed for a year or whatever, not that recently. I believe it's on Tuesday, but if you call the senior center, I'm not sure if they're doing Zoom. Maybe they would like to have someone ask for it, and maybe they would do it on Zoom. This is the kind of thing that maybe would be possible.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's very thoughtful of you to share about this group, and perhaps either Cheryl or Sharon can elaborate a little more on the support group for widowers.
Sharon can do that, but I think she's having a problem unmuting herself.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. Oh, there she goes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Sharon.
There we go. Thank you. So the Council on Aging did have a widow and widowers group that is currently not happening, but I will reach out to the leader to see if that's something she would consider trying to do it over Zoom. We also have a great group of staff and volunteers that are making calls to seniors that just want somebody to talk to. That we can call you once a day, once a week, once a month, whatever you'd like. So keep that in mind. And then we also have Honor Society students that can help connect you to Zoom. So I know folks are able to connect right now and on technology, but for those watching later on ActonTV, if this is something that you'd like, reach out to the Council on Aging and we can connect you with a student that can walk you through some of those things. And our number is 978-929-6652.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm so glad to hear that there are a number of programs still happening and considering, joining on Zoom and restarting on Zoom. That's great.
So I don't have any more questions, Carolyn.
Okay, then I guess I have a resource list, so I could go over some of the resources that are on the list. I'm just realizing I'm not sure how to send it to you in the chat. It's on a Word document, so I think what I'll just do is show my screen, and then I can send it to you, Cheryl, and Sharon to share with our participants.
Great, thank you.
Let me just bring that up because this resource list has some other ideas that I don't think I covered in the talk. Okay, I'm just pulling it up right now. Okay, so I'll send this resource list out to Cheryl and Sharon to share with the group. It's in a Word document. And these are basically just some resources I've come across in my travels working with the older population. And the first one here is very innovative network Aging 2.0, and that's actually where I found some of the resources on this list, in particular the technology resources. It's a website that has updates, and then you can connect with different locations around the world, which is fascinating too. Okay. CareMore is a health delivery system that connects with older adults. It's not in Massachusetts, but I thought it was interesting for folks to know about. The 3 Wishes Project is a simple project to ask patients who are in the ICU or towards their ending days to find out what they really want in the last days of their life. And this is a beautiful project to really find out what, in particular, individuals and their families really want. It's a beautiful project. Beacon Hill Village, near us, Beacon Hill in Boston, was one of the first of hundreds of villages around the country. It's basically like a network where you pay in and you get various different services. And of course, at the Council on Aging, you don't have to pay in, you just show up, which is beautiful. The villages have a few more different services, but of course, there's a membership fee affiliated with that. Addressing Loneliness Through Movement and Arts was started by some folks I know in the expressive arts therapy community. And it's just a really wonderful way to find some videos online for music and arts and to connect with others who enjoy the movement and arts. It wouldn't be a complete resource list if I didn't mention the Massachusetts Executive Office of Elder Affairs. In particular, is the office has like a hotline, elder abuse hotline, which I will say I called and I dialed the number wrong and I ended up calling a spam number. So make sure that you call the exact number that's listed on the website. Massachusetts Cultural Council provides grants across the state, and there's probably a local cultural council in Acton that oversees providing grants from the state for community projects. This is including arts, music, languages, dance, movement, theater, writing, all kinds of different cultural aspects. And their Culture RX initiative aims to broaden the inclusion of all Massachusetts residents. MIT's Age Lab is a lab where they're doing research to further understanding of aging and what it's like and what resources and supports are needed. They have several interesting tidbits on their website about the research they've discovered and the connections that they're making in the community. NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a broad organization. So it supports people of all ages, and it may have resources for those if you have a loved one or someone who is dealing with mental illness that could provide resources for you, as well, of course, as the Council on Aging. Technology, these are some fun pieces out here, and this is not a limited list. There's a lot more out there in the realm of technology. It's really exciting seeing these different innovations out there to support the aging process and support older adults. Familio is actually like the family creates online this newspaper, and then it's printed to send if the older adult does not want to use technology. Then they can send a printed newspaper to the older adult. And it's very specified. So basically keeping the older adult in the know about the field. Has anyone ever tried 3D glasses? Or you're not interested, then you wouldn't be interested in Rendeavor, but if you have, it's 3D technology to combat social isolation. They'll provide these kits you have to pay, and you get like a bunch of kits, I guess, like you get 5 or 6 of the 3D glasses, and then everyone is seeing the same thing and connecting in the adventure of the 3D adventure there. Seniorly presents a 1-hour live stream show, and they have on their website the times. And this is an interesting idea that I would imagine would continue further during this time of the pandemic, that there would be greater need for online content specific to older adults that would be of interest. SoundMind is a voice-activated care assistant. It looks like an iPad, but it's a very simple setup, and it's totally voice-activated to help with like medication reminders, making phone calls, even calling doctor or family members. I think there are a few other technology pieces in this area. I've heard of other like voice-activated assistants in addition to this one. Tombot is a robotic animal. It basically looks like your grandchildren's or your children's stuffed animals, but it moves. Think of it almost as like a toy for older adults, and it looks really cute. It's intended more for those who may have cognitive decline, but it appears that it would be useful for anyone who also may be housebound or maybe not able to get out as much, because it's basically a robotic animal that does not need nearly as much care as a traditional pet would need.
Carolyn, before you go on to books, I do have a question. Do you mind taking a question?
Sure.
Go ahead, Ellen. You should be allowed to talk. Just need to unmute yourself now.
Am I unmuted?
Hi, Ellen. Yes, I
Hi.
can hear you.
Hi, Carolyn. I have a question that some of these resources sound very good and such. The question really is, for some of the people who might be 80 or older, and the idea of actually being able to have the, for lack of a better word, the wherewithal, the oomph, these are non-technical terms, but it's the ability to do any of these outreach things, do any of these, just we can easily say, maybe those of us who are 50s, 60s, maybe even 70, oh, you just call and blah. Well, for people who are starting to really be in the later aging years, in the 80s, let's say, many people in their 80s are quite robust and doing great and all that. But the question really is, what are some of the thoughts, perhaps, or the literature or particular ideas that we can identify, that the field has identified as ways to sort of overcome that obstacle, short of giving up on and just saying these people, loneliness is almost like another condition, a pre-existing condition of, that's when you get that age, it's going to be hard to not be socially isolated. Do you understand the question?
Thank you, Ellen. It sounds like you're asking in particular people in their 80s, 90s, and above, who for whom it might be easy enough to make a phone call, but some of these other technology aspects would be challenging.
That's part of the question. And the other part of the question really is there any research that shows what might help these people in their 80s and maybe above be able to be willing to, even if they had somebody help them with the technology and got all set up with it, have the wherewithal to be willing to extend themselves and participate?
Mm-hmm. Yes, great question. Right, that you, as you said, you have to have the oomph for the self-interest in some of these activities. Right. And that is what I've seen with working with some seniors, is they get to a certain age and they're like, I'm just going to watch. I don't want to participate. I'm just happy to sit here. And so I think some of it is like leading the horse to water. It's like you can engage and remind people, but people can choose whether they're feeling, lonely or left out, or if they want to participate. But I think it's also, that's part of it. It's like it is, this sort of self, you have to bring yourself to the table. But I think it's also the community at large, which you have the Council on Aging, and it sounds like they're making phone calls to people and checking in on people, which is wonderful and so needed right now. But I think also the larger community, what if we got some of the school kids or some middle-aged or young professionals groups to call around. I think it really needs to be an engagement at every level of the community with one another. I think that's really what the solution will be. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for the question, the aspect of the question, what is the research in terms of the sort of older adults, 80s and 90s and above. And the research I looked at really did focus a lot on 60s, 70s, and maybe up to 80. So I think you bring a good point that there does need to be research that's not. Yes.
Right. I mean, if you tried to do a sociogram for the person who was in their 80s, there'd be fewer entries to make, most likely. So I think that actually is an area ripe for information. The need is great at that age bracket. So I'd be curious if you come across anything. That'd be great.
Sure. Yes. If I do further, then I'll definitely send it to the Council on Aging to share, because I do think that is a greater need. I think actually it's that the older adults who we need to be a little bit more. We certainly need to be concerned about everyone in our community, but some older adults who may be less likely to have access to technology, maybe slightly less able to move around, may have lost more family and friends. So I certainly see what you're saying.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings up a good point about finding ways to participate in research, I suppose, as well. If anyone is ever interested in being part of that, you can certainly contact the MIT Age Lab. I know they're always looking for participants there. And
that's all I had, Carolyn. Sorry for the
great. That's a great question. But yes, going back to the sociogram, I think my goal with that was really for us each to figure out who we have in our networks, who we feel connections to, who we may want to make more connections to. Because I think as much as it's important to reach out to the broader community, it's a lot easier to start with those connections we have and keep those strong than it is, to restart connections. That's at least what I've heard with some of the older adults I've worked with, is that after friends or family pass away, they just say it's harder to meet people and connect with people at their age. I'll just wrap up with my resource list then. And I forgot to talk about technology a little bit as well. So just some books that some of you may have read even, or may be intrigued to read. This book, Belong. I've not read the whole book, but it's a really fascinating look at communities, tribes, how we connect with one another. The Blue Zones. I think that some book clubs have actually looked at this. The Blue Zones are the areas in the world where people continuously seem to live up to 100 and over, and they've done research as to why that happens. Bowling Alone is one of the earlier books from the 80s about loneliness and its effects. And Emotional First Aid is a little bit more about thinking about how we often think about physical health and like needing to get a Band-Aid for that, but what about emotional health when we are hurting or suffering? Loneliness is a book by John Cacioppo, who was the self-described Dr. Loneliness, who came out late 90s doing some research, has unfortunately passed away, but his widow continues to work on this area of loneliness and how it affects us. His widow is Stephanie Cacioppo. The Men's Shed Movement, The Company of Men, I've not read this, but I came across it in my research. It's an interesting look at, and started in Australia, was a young woman found working at the senior center that all the ladies would go hang out in the senior center and the men would be sitting in their cars waiting for their wives. So she connected with one of the men to figure out what would the men perhaps like to do that could be socially connecting. And they created a shed where they hang out, do various woodworking, and learn from one another. And Together, the book that I had mentioned that came out just this year, very timely book for 2020. And perhaps for the greater community, this just recently started Letters Against Isolation, was started by two young people in Cambridge or Boston. And it's writing letters to those who might be socially isolated. It might be something that would be of interest, actually even to seniors who want to write to other seniors. I'm going to stop my sharing there. And I think I had looked at my PowerPoint. I had forgotten to mention about them within these coping strategies, the various aspects of technology that are out there. There's quite a bit of research showing that technology can help seniors, but like as Ellen mentioned, it's a matter of, do you need to learn how much effort needs to go into learn these different technological aspects, or how simple is it, to say be on social media. Well, the technology studies I found actually said that those who know how to use the internet, seniors who know how to use internet, were likely to have a reduced sense of loneliness. And it seems like it was just like a broad sense, because when they looked at social media networks such as like Facebook or others, they found that use of those didn't necessarily affect loneliness one way or another. But I think there's more research to be done in that area. Technology has also been researched as the use of Wii. I hope that everyone knows Wii, W-I-I, is like a virtual game where you put on your television, you have like remote sticks, and you can pick like different games that you would either play with someone in the room or you would play with someone on the TV screen. And those have been shown to be effective for staying socially connected. The study compared people who were watching TV to people who were playing Wii, and those who were in the Wii group were found to have more positive feelings after the experience than those in the TV group. So that's for comparison there. Telecare or telehealth also shows promising connections. My opinion is that this really depends on the need of the person. If you need a dermatology visit, probably telehealth or telecare is not going to quite do it. It might be awkward. So I think this depends on the type of service that is rented, what would be beneficial through telecare. As I had mentioned to Ruth, the possibility of online chat rooms. Some people find that these are helpful. I know, for example, like the Alzheimer's Association has online groups of people across the US who will support one another, either caregiving for those with Alzheimer's or coping with the loss of someone to Alzheimer's. And some people find these to be supportive. Research so far shows that they didn't impact loneliness, but they did impact they positively did impact people's feeling of social connectedness. So there's quite a bit more research that needs to be done on technology, but perhaps as a lot of it is relatively new at this point, there just hasn't been like as much out there yet, because we're still exploring and expanding what is useful. So that's in terms of technology again. So there's like internet, there are social networking sites. You have these, like robots or animal bots. You have like voice commanded technology. Of course, you have the online chat rooms, and then telecare. So again, just recap, those are the various technology areas that I would imagine will continue growing in the next several years. So I think we'll wrap up. I just wanted, before we'll take a few more questions if there are any, but that was the extent of what I had to share with you. So I thought we would wrap up by re-rating the opening questions and seeing, just to figure out and judge how much you felt that you learned today. And you could even think about what was helpful, or maybe what other questions might be helpful for future presentations. So again, the first question was, to rate on 1 to 5, I understand what loneliness and social isolation are and how they can affect my health. And the second question, to rate 1 to 5, I know who I can reach out to and if I feel lonely or isolated. All right, so I think we'll see if we have any other questions, comments, anything that would be useful going forward.
I'm not showing any comments or questions at this time.
Okay.
So, I just want to interject here. So, we are working collaboratively on a grant, trying to reduce social isolation in our senior population. So, feel free, anybody listening, if you have any questions at all about what work we're doing, please reach out to either Sharon Mercurio or myself, so I can be reached at the health department, 978-929-6632. If you have any questions at all, we're here to work on this issue and hopefully help prevent feelings of isolation and loneliness. So again, any questions, we please reach out to either one of us. We'd appreciate that. Thank you. And
Great, thank you, Cheryl. Do you want to put that number in the chat so people can see it as well?
Sure.
And then any other, I guess, any websites or anything. Like I said, I'm trying to figure out how to put my Word document in there because I know you can do it somehow, but technology has evaded me. All right, well, if we don't have any questions or comments, thank you, Sharon. Great.
Yep. So we do not have any other questions. I want to thank you, Carolyn. We truly appreciate this subject matter, the discussion, your expertise. Thank you again, and we look forward to working with you again for any other issues that may arise as a result of this grant. So thank you.
You're welcome, Cheryl, and it was really a pleasure to put this together. As I mentioned, it's such a timely topic, and I think it is so important for all of us to stay connected and for all of us to connect with different levels of the community as well, because we all are probably experiencing some degree of isolation and loneliness, and certainly having known that, know how to reach out to others to support them going through it. So thank you all, and be well and stay connected. We're in this together.
Yes, we are. Thank you again. Bye now.
All right. Bye-bye.